The Retribution Paladin in Mists of Pandaria is hands down my favourite spec in terms of changes. As someone who's played a Paladin since all the way back in 2004, there's never an expansion where one of my ults isn't a Paladin. If you're playing a Retribution Paladin currently in Cataclysm, then you'll know it's quite a slow, methodical rotation, and there's quite a few minor problems with it, like how slow it is to actually generate holy power, and the fact that you only have a single target holy power spender. Well, all of that's about to change. There's a few things that change in Mists of Pandaria that just make the rotation feel much faster paced, a lot more fluid, and just in general, a lot of fun to play. Before we get into the changes though, if you don't know about the talents, be sure to check the link in the description, which is to a playlist, which basically, once the playlist is complete, will cover absolutely everything. There's a video there already about the talent changes, and then there's going to be each individual spec and a short guide on how to play them. So over the next few weeks, this playlist should have 7 or 8 videos in at least. But we won't be going into detail on the talents because, as I say, just go check that individual video out. Now, firstly, if we talk about the minor things that have changed, if you're using the tier 13 set bonus at the moment in Cataclysm, then your Judgment also generates holy power alongside, of course, Crusader Strike. Well, you won't need the set bonus because by default, Judgment for Retribution does generate holy power anyway. Not only that, so does Exorcism and Hammer of Wrath. So basically anything that isn't a holy power spender will generate holy power, meaning that you generate more to be able to spend more. So before we get into the main abilities, let's talk about some of the utility changes to Retribution, which are absolutely massive. Firstly, you're going to get an instant cast spell called Blinding Light, which is on a 2-minute cooldown, and this isn't unique to Retribution, but I only want to focus on Retribution anyway, so it will get brought up in the Holy video, the prop video, etc. It's an instant cast 2-minute cooldown, basically an AoE disorientate for 6 seconds. This can be particularly useful not only in PvP, but if there's a group of casters when you're doing dungeons or you're doing raids, this is a great way to stop all of them casting at the same time. Without the need of a glyph now, Divine Protection by default grants 40% magic damage reduction, but now you can actually glyph it to be 20% physical and 20% magic. Nothing major there, I just thought I'd mention it. Another minor mention if you missed the buffs and debuffs video that I put out a couple of weeks ago, Blessing of Might now is a 3000 mastery buff at level 90, but Blessing of Kings remains exactly the same, being a 5% stat buff. Another really nice addition utility-wise is Emancipate. Emancipate is absolutely amazing, but it is very mana hungry, being 9000 mana. And as a human, for example, you're only going to have 60k, because what you might not know is intellect does not increase the size of mana pools anymore. The way you get an increased mana pool would be something like being a gnome, where you get 5% extra total mana. Instead, at level 90, every spec of the same race will have the same amount of mana. So it doesn't matter if you're in pre-raid gear or absolute full BIS gear in Siege of Orgrimmar. If you're, for example, a human holy paladin, you're going to have exactly the same mana pool. The big difference between the gear, of course, would be something like Spirit, which will dictate the amount of spamming of spells you can actually do. But as a Ret Paladin with about 60k mana, having something cost 9k is quite expensive, but you're not going to be using it very often because what it does is unshackles your spirit, freeing you from one movement impairing effect. So obviously this is absolutely amazing in PvP, but even for PvE, if a slow goes out or something like that, you can break it to get out of bad stuff or to get back into the boss quicker to start doing damage. One of your big cooldowns being Guardian of Ancient Kings. At the moment in Cataclysm, it's a 5-minute cooldown. Well, the good news is, whilst it does almost exactly the same thing, but actually seems to hit like a truck in Mists of Pandaria in comparison to Cataclysm, it is now only on a 3-minute cooldown. Before we carry on, just a little bit on seals. So seals now work differently. They work like your auras do now, because auras have gone, so now each seal is just toggleable on and off. Seal of Truth is still your single target seal. Seal of Righteousness is still your AoE seal, where it causes your melee attacks to do 9% weapon damage to all targets within 8 yards. Seal of Insight is your healing seal, so we'll talk about that in the Holy video. And finally, Seal of Justice has had a bit of a rework as well. This now causes your melee attacks to deal 20% additional holy damage and reduce the target's movement speed by 50% for 8 seconds. So it's basically a slowing seal, but at the same time you're still doing 20% more damage, so it's actually quite nice. Of course, you'd only be using it in niche circumstances in PvE, and probably quite frequently in PvP. Now, more on the utility before we get to the main actual abilities. Absolve adjusts your Hand of Sacrifice. Now, Hand of Sacrifice still does the same thing, where it will transfer 30% of the damage taken by the target to you, but now it also removes all magic effects from the target. But what's really good about Hand of Sacrifice particularly in Mists of Pandaria, is not only can you talent it so you get 2 charges of it, so you can use it twice before it actually goes on cooldown. That also goes for Hand of Freedom, Hand of Protection, and Hand of Salvation. But you can also glyph it, so it no longer redirects damage to the Paladin. So now it pretty much works as an external that you can use for a 30% damage reduction. It's still going to take into consideration your maximum health pool, but you've got 2 charges of it if you talent it as well. So using this correctly on fights will be absolutely massive. Judgments of the Bold, which is the passive that allows your judgment to actually give you holy power, also brings the 4% physical damage taken debuff to the raid as well, so it's no longer just warrior and rogue. And Sanctity of Battle has changed quite drastically, so at the moment you'll find this in Cataclysm in the Retribution tree. Now it's just a passive where melee haste effects lower the cooldown and global cooldown of your Judgment, Crusader Strike, Hammer of the Righteous, Exorcism, and Hammer of Wrath. So basically your main DPS toolkit, which you saw Hammer of the Righteous there and you was like, what? That's protection, you don't get that as ret. We'll get to that in a minute. Art of War still exists, but because Exorcism does so much damage now, it doesn't need the other components that you get in Cataclysm. Instead now, your auto attacks have just got a 20% chance of resetting it. And finally, Sword of the Light, which basically brings the Retribution Paladin online. It increases the damage you deal with two-handed melee weapons. Your spell power is equal to 50% of your attack power. It grants 6% of your maximum mana every 2 seconds and increases the healing of Word of Glory by 60% and Flash of Light by 100%. This is the talent that basically stops you from going ohm. I said you've got a really small mana pool, which is 100% true. You know, compared to other classes, 60k is kind of nothing, when even just swapping seals costs nearly 10k mana. But the fact that you've got this talent where you're getting 6% of it back every 2 seconds, it basically means you'd struggle running out of mana ever, even in a really long fight. Devotion Aura changes as well, and as Retribution being able to bring a nice raid cooldown is obviously awesome for your raid. And this on a 3-minute cooldown, which lasts 6 seconds, reduces all magic damage taken by 20%, and gives immunity to silence and interrupt effects. Now, an interesting glyph that you could use with this is actually to reduce the cooldown by 60 seconds, which would put it on a 2-minute cooldown, but it would only affect yourself. There's not many times that you're going to want to turn a raid cooldown into a personal cooldown and be able to use it more frequently, but I just wanted to throw it in there. Okay, so now that covers the boring utility and passives. What about your actual damage abilities? Of course, one of your main abilities that you're going to be using is going to be Crusader Strike. This gives you a holy power, it does damage, and it applies weaken blows as well, where it reduces the boss or the mob or whatever you're fighting. It reduces their physical damage dealt by 10%. Like I said at the start, 2 of the things that were really a problem when it comes to Ret Paladin and Cataclysm is having holy power and only being able to spend it on Templar's Verdict. Well, now you've got an AoE builder and an AoE spender. So Hammer of the Righteous will be nothing new to you if you've played other specs of Paladin, namely Protection. This is on the same cooldown, as in shared cooldown with Crusader Strike, does exactly the same secondary effect, applying weaken blows, but this is your AoE builder. So you've got your single target builder of holy power, which is Crusader Strike, your AoE builder, which is Hammer of the Righteous, where it hammers the current target for 20% weapon damage, causing a wave of light that hits all targets within 8 yards for 35% holy weapon damage. And of course, most importantly, grants a charge of holy power. So your builders in general is Crusader Strike for single target, Hammer of the Righteous for AoE, and then you're going to have Exorcism, which also generates holy power, and you'll be using this on single target and AoE, thanks to a glyph. So Exorcism, with its 20% chance to reset on your melee attacks thanks to Art of War, is on around a 15-second cooldown, and remember, all of these cooldowns of things are reduced by haste, but it blasts the target for a crapload of holy damage, and with a glyph it also does 25% of the damage to all enemies within 8 yards of the primary target. Of course, there has to be a downside to a glyph like this that's going to provide so much more damage on AoE, and all that is that it's going to reduce the Exorcism range into melee range, which as a Ret Paladin doesn't matter. Like, that's perfect, actually, because you're going to get that extra 25% cleave on absolutely everything, just at the cost of you having to be stood next to the target, which, as a Retribution Paladin, you should always be stood next to the target. And now your spenders. So Inquisition is still something that you're going to want to keep up 100% of the time. You still consume up to 3 holy power, and you now get 20 seconds per charge. So with 3 holy power, it's going to last a full minute. Not only that, if it's an ad fight where you can get killing blows, the duration of your Inquisition is also increased by 30 seconds every time you do that. So Inquisition, with such a longer amount of time that it's up for, and the fact that if you do get killing blows on things, you can extend it if you're using the glyph, it's actually just a lot easier to maintain now. it still gives you 30% more holy damage, but it also now gives you 10% additional critical strike chance as well. That's Spender 1 of 3. Of course, Templar's Verdict is Spender 2 of 3, where it's just a powerful weapon strike that consumes 3 charges of holy power to deal 275% weapon damage, plus 628. But that is going by my gear. Now, if you've ever accidentally pressed Templar's Verdict too early, or you were spamming your buttons or whatever you was doing, and you used it with 1 or maybe 2 holy power, that isn't possible anymore. You have to have 3 charges to be able to use it. And if you've been waiting all this time wondering where Divine Storm is, well, Divine Storm is now actually a spender. So it's a really strong AoE spending ability. With 3 holy power, it causes 100% weapon damage as holy damage to all enemies within 8 yards. Again, depending on talent choices, if you take Divine Purpose, which will be a proc that you're used to in Cataclysm, but now you get it by choice as a talent, you'll get procs where you can use Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm for free, and it will use it as if it had 3 holy power. And honestly, getting back-to-back Divine Storm procs feels absolutely amazing. And the last ability that you're going to use on every fight would be Hammer of Wrath, which is basically your execute. It can only be used on targets with 20% or less health, as you know already, because you'll be using it in Cataclysm. It does a lot of damage and generates a holy power. Now, during Avenging Wrath, which is your cooldown, which increases all damage and healing caused by 20% for 20 seconds, like Cataclysm, this then brings Hammer of Wrath into your rotation. You can extend Avenging Wrath cooldown if you didn't want to run Divine Purpose by taking Sanctified Wrath, which actually reduces the cooldown of Hammer of Wrath by another 50%, and also causes your Avenging Wrath to last an extra 10 seconds. There's a lot to be said, and I said a lot, actually, in the Paladin talent video around this particular row of talents, the level 75 talents, because they're all really strong. Because even Holy Avenger is strong, you don't get Zealotry anymore, but basically Holy Avenger is Zealotry. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, so it lines up perfectly with Avenging Wrath. And if you choose this, it works the same way as Zealotry does now, where you use Crusader Strike, generate 3 holy power. You'll use Exorcism, it will generate 3 holy power. Judgment, 3 holy power. I think you know what I mean. And then your other big cooldown that you just get as part of your general toolkit outside of talents is Guardian of Ancient Kings as well, which, like I said earlier, is now only on a 3-minute cooldown. There is one last thing I should mention, which does apply to all Paladins, not just Retribution. You also get Boundless Conviction, which is a passive that lets you store 2 additional holy power. So now you're kind of like a rogue, because you've got 5 holy power instead of 5 combo points. Your spenders like Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm will never actually act as if they was used with 4 holy power. They will only ever consume 3, and it does mean that if you're on 4 holy power and your Crusader Strikes just come off cooldown, you could Crusader Strike with 4 using Templar's Verdict, and then you'd only have to generate 1 more holy power and you can Templar's Verdict again. Like I say, it just feels like it flows so much quicker. Of course, you do still have things like interrupt. If there's anything that I haven't mentioned where you're like, well, what about my heals? What about my defensives? Then they just haven't changed. You've got Word of Glory, you've got talents where you can Judgment that makes your Flash of Light become instant. Survivability as a Ret Paladin is actually pretty insane. And then one quick one when it just comes to your Mastery. The Mastery overall hasn't changed. The more Mastery you've got, the more holy damage that you're going to deal with certain abilities, as in it does extra damage as holy. The only minor adjustment is they've actually added 2 abilities to it. So both Hammer of the Righteous and Hammer of Wrath benefit from your Mastery as well now, which is obviously only a good thing. And quite honestly, that's about it. I will be doing a Ret guide, of course, where we talk about the best rotation, but that will be part of this playlist. For this, I just wanted to highlight the biggest changes, which I think I covered almost every single change anyway. So if you enjoyed the video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe. As I say, over the next few weeks, couple of months, whatever, all of these playlists for every class for Mr. Pandaria will be finished. So you'll be able to just click on the playlist and go, what are the talents? What are the glyphs? What are the changes? And then finally, how do I play it? So again, if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Check out Rested XP for the quickest way to level in Cataclysm. And when the MoP guides come out as well, you'll be able to pick those up. It is an affiliate link, so any guides bought go towards supporting the channel. So thanks in advance for that. And I'll see you on the next one.